Captain Sarah Chun walked across the tarmac at Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, her flight suit crisp despite the early morning heat already building in the desert air. The sound of jet engines warming up filled the air as various aircraft prepared for the day's missions. F-22 Raptors gleamed in their hangar bays, their sleek surfaces reflecting the harsh sunlight like metallic mirrors. F-35 Lightning II fighters taxied past with their pilots sitting high in advanced cockpits filled with digital displays and cutting-edge avionics. Then, there was Sarah's aircraft. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the flight line like a grizzled veteran among fresh recruits. Its gray paint was faded and chipped from countless missions, and its twin engines mounted high on the fuselage gave it an ungainly appearance that had earned it the nickname Warthog. The massive GU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from its nose looked more like something from World War II than a modern weapon system. "Chun, you're really going to keep flying that thing?" Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb called out as he walked toward his F-35. Webb was one of the squadron's rising stars, a pilot who had transitioned from F-16s to the latest fifth-generation fighter. His aircraft represented the pinnacle of modern military technology, with stealth capabilities, advanced sensors, and computer systems that could process information faster than any human pilot. Sarah adjusted her helmet under her arm and looked back at him with a slight smile. "This thing has kept me alive through 87 combat missions, sir. I'm not ready to give up on it yet." Webb shook his head with a condescending laugh. 87 missions in an aircraft that first flew when your parents were in high school. The military is spending billions on next-generation fighters, and you're clinging to a plane that was designed to fight Soviet tanks that don't even exist anymore. Other pilots had stopped their pre-flight routines to listen to the conversation. It was a debate that had been ongoing for months as the Air Force continued to modernize its fleet. The A-10 was scheduled for retirement, and many believed that pilots like Sarah were holding back progress by insisting on flying outdated aircraft. Captain James Morrison, who flew an F-22 Raptor, joined the conversation. "Sarah, I get the emotional attachment, but let's be realistic here. Your Warthog can't penetrate modern air defenses. It can't engage targets beyond visual range. It doesn't have the sensors or the speed to survive in a contested environment. Meanwhile, my Raptor can engage multiple targets simultaneously from distances your aircraft can't even detect threats." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm and professional. "And how many times has your Raptor provided close air support to troops in contact? How many times has it loitered over a battlefield for hours, ready to provide immediate fire support when ground forces need it most?" Morrison's expression showed mild irritation. "That's not what the Raptor is designed for. We have air superiority and strategic strike capabilities that your aircraft could never match." "Different tools for different jobs," Sarah replied. But she could see she was fighting an uphill battle. The argument represented a larger philosophical divide within the Air Force. On one side were pilots like Webb and Morrison, who embraced the future of aerial warfare with its emphasis on stealth, speed, and beyond visual range engagement. They saw the battlefield as a chess game played at supersonic speeds with invisible pieces, where the winner was determined by superior technology and information processing. On the other side were pilots like Sarah, who believed that close air support and battlefield persistence were irreplaceable capabilities. They argued that no amount of technological sophistication could replace the psychological effect of having a heavily armed aircraft visible overhead, ready to engage enemy forces at a moment's notice. The debate wasn't just academic. Budget constraints and changing strategic priorities meant that older aircraft like the A-10 were being phased out to make room for newer, more expensive platforms. Every month, more Warthogs were sent to the aircraft graveyard, their useful parts harvested before the remainder was scrapped. Sarah had grown up in a military family. Her father had been an A-10 pilot during the Gulf War, and she had heard countless stories about the aircraft's legendary durability and effectiveness. She had seen photographs of A-10s returning to base with massive battle damage that would have downed any other aircraft. She knew the history of pilots who had coaxed their wounded Warthogs home with missing engines, shredded control surfaces, and holes large enough to walk through. But history wasn't enough to save the program. The military needed to adapt to new threats and new environments. The days of flying low and slow over clearly defined battlefields were supposedly over. Modern warfare required speed, stealth, and the ability to engage targets from long range. As the pilots dispersed to complete their pre-flight preparations, Sarah made her way to her aircraft. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, was already performing the final inspection. "Morning, Captain," Rodriguez said with a grin. "She's ready to go? All systems green, full ammunition load, and I've double-checked the hydraulics. You know how she gets cranky when she's been sitting overnight." Rodriguez had been maintaining a TENS for over 20 years. He knew every rivet, wire, and component of the aircraft better than most pilots knew their own cars. He was also one of the few people who genuinely understood why Sarah was so attached to the Warthog. "Any word on our mission today?" Rodriguez asked as he helped Sarah with her pre-flight inspection. "Standard patrol over the Cunner province," Sarah replied, running her hands along the aircraft's control surfaces and checking for any signs of damage or wear. "Intel says enemy activity has been increasing in the area. Ground forces have been reporting possible weapons smuggling along the mountain passes." The pre-flight inspection of an A-10 was a ritual that Sarah had performed hundreds of times, but she never rushed through it. Unlike the newer aircraft with their computerized diagnostic systems, the Warthog required a hands-on approach. Pilots needed to physically examine the aircraft, looking for signs of stress, damage, or where that might not show up on electronic displays. The A-10's design philosophy was fundamentally different from modern fighters. Where newer aircraft prioritized sophistication and complexity, the Warthog emphasized simplicity and durability. Its systems were designed to be redundant and reparable. If one hydraulic system failed, there were backups. If the primary flight controls were damaged, there were manual reversions. The aircraft could fly and fight with damage that would ground other planes. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and began her pre-start checklist. The interior of the A-10 was Spartan compared to newer aircraft. Instead of large color displays and touch screens, there were traditional analog gauges and switches. The stick was massive and mechanical, providing direct feedback from the control surfaces. The pilot sat in a titanium bathtub designed to protect against ground fire, surrounded by thick, bulletproof glass. As she strapped herself in, Sarah thought about the conversation with Webb and Morrison. She understood their perspective, but she also knew they had never experienced what it was like to provide close air support to infantry under fire. They had never seen the relief on a ground controller's face when an A-10 arrived overhead. They had never felt the satisfaction of silencing an enemy machine gun position that was pinning down friendly forces. The engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine. Unlike the sophisticated turbofans of modern fighters, the A-10's engines were simple and reliable. They could ingest debris, sustain battle damage, and continue running when other engines would fail. Sarah contacted the control tower and received clearance for takeoff. As she taxied toward the runway, she passed the flight line where the F-22s and F-35s were preparing for their own missions. The contrast was striking. Where her aircraft looked purposeful and workmanlike, the newer fighters appeared sleek and predatory. During takeoff, the differences became even more apparent. The A-10 accelerated slowly, its heavy airframe and massive ammunition load requiring most of the runway before becoming airborne. In contrast, the fighters could leap off the ground with dramatic displays of power and acceleration. But once airborne, Sarah felt the familiar comfort of flying an aircraft that was completely honest in its handling. There were no computer systems fighting her inputs or trying to compensate for pilot error. The Warthog flew exactly the way it was supposed to, responding predictably to control inputs and providing clear feedback about its performance and limitations. As she climbed toward her patrol altitude, Sarah reflected on her career and the choices that had brought her to this point. She could have transitioned to newer aircraft. Her performance reviews were excellent, and her commanders had offered her opportunities to fly F-16s or even F-35s. But something about the A-10 had captured her imagination and refused to let go. Maybe it was the aircraft's blue-collar work ethic, its willingness to get dirty and stay in the fight when other planes would return to base. Maybe it was the connection she felt to the ground forces who depended on close air support. Or maybe it was simply stubborn pride, a refusal to abandon something she believed in just because it was unfashionable. Whatever the reason, Sarah knew that she was among the last generation of A-10 pilots. In a few years, all the Warthogs would be retired, their missions transferred to other aircraft or eliminated entirely. The pilots would be retrained on newer platforms, and the institutional knowledge of close air support would gradually fade away. The radio crackled with the voice of the air traffic controller. Hog 47, you're cleared to your patrol area. Contact ground control on frequency 257.4 when you arrive on station. Roger. Hog 47 switching to patrol frequency, Sarah replied. As she flew toward the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, Sarah had no idea that she was about to face the most challenging mission of her career. She couldn't know that everything she believed about her aircraft and her capabilities was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. Most importantly, she had no way of predicting that the same pilots who had mocked her choice of aircraft would soon be depending on her for their very survival. The morning sun climbed higher in the clear sky as the lone A-10 disappeared into the mountains, carrying with it decades of tradition, hard-won experience, and one pilot's unshakable faith in an aircraft that the world had written off as obsolete. The Kunar province stretched out below Sarah's A-10 like a wrinkled brown blanket thrown across the landscape. Jagged peaks rose thousands of feet above sea level, their surfaces carved by centuries of wind and rain into maze-like networks of valleys, ridges, and hidden passes. This was some of the most challenging terrain on Earth for military operations, where the thin air made aircraft engines work harder and where enemy fighters could disappear into countless hiding places. Sarah leveled off at 8,000 feet and began her patrol pattern. The morning air was smooth, and her aircraft felt solid beneath her hands. She checked her fuel gauges, weapon status, and communication systems. Everything was functioning normally, just as it had on dozens of previous missions. Ground control, Hog 47 on station and ready for tasking, she reported over the radio. Hog 47, ground control. We have you on scope. No immediate tasking at this time. Continue patrol pattern and stand by for further instructions. The response was routine, but Sarah had learned to read between the lines during her deployments. When ground controllers said they had no immediate tasking, it usually meant they were tracking something but weren't ready to commit air assets yet. Intelligence was often incomplete in this region, where sophisticated surveillance systems struggled to penetrate the mountainous terrain and where human intelligence sources were scarce and unreliable. Sarah settled into the methodical rhythm of patrol flying. She systematically scanned the valleys below, looking for any signs of unusual activity. Vehicles moving along remote mountain roads, groups of people in areas where civilians rarely traveled, or structures that appeared out of place. After months of flying over the same region, she had developed an almost intuitive sense of what belonged and what didn't. The A-10's low altitude and relatively slow speed were perfect for this type of reconnaissance. While faster jets would flash overhead too quickly to observe details, the Warthog could loiter for hours, giving pilots time to study the terrain and identify potential threats. The aircraft's exceptional fuel efficiency meant it could remain on station far longer than other fighters, providing persistent coverage that ground forces valued highly. 40 minutes into her patrol, Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission that would change everything. All aircraft, this is Overlord Control with a priority mission update. We have two F-35s conducting a reconnaissance mission over Grid 77 Charlie that have gone off radar. Last known position was approximately 15 miles northeast of your current location, Hog 47. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Aircraft didn't just disappear from radar without reason, especially not F-35s with their advanced communication and navigation systems. She immediately changed course toward the reported last known position. Overlord Control, Hog 47. I'm proceeding to the search area. Can you provide more details on the missing aircraft? Hog 47. The aircraft were call signs Viper 11 and Viper 12, conducting a photo reconnaissance mission over suspected weapons storage sites. They maintained regular communication until approximately 0945 local time, then went silent. We've been unable to raise them on any frequency. As Sarah flew toward the search area, she processed the implications of what she had heard. F-35s were equipped with some of the most sophisticated communication equipment in the military inventory. They had multiple backup systems and emergency beacons that would activate automatically if the aircraft were in distress. For two aircraft to go silent simultaneously suggested either a coordinated enemy action or some kind of catastrophic system failure. The terrain ahead became even more rugged as Sarah approached the search area. Narrow valleys snaked between towering peaks, creating a landscape that looked more like the surface of an alien planet than anything on Earth. Radio communication became sporadic as mountains blocked line-of-sight transmission, and GPS signals weakened in the deep valleys. Overlord Control, Hog 47 approaching the last known position of the missing aircraft. I'm descending to get a better look at the terrain. Roger, Hog 47. Be advised we're launching additional search assets, but you're the closest aircraft to the area. Use extreme caution. Intelligence indicates possible surface-to-air missile activity in that region. Surface-to-air missiles. The word sent a chill through Sarah's mind. If enemy forces had managed to position SAM systems in the mountains, it could explain the sudden disappearance of the F-35s. Despite their stealth capabilities, the aircraft would have been vulnerable if they flew into the engagement envelope of a sophisticated missile system at close range. Sarah descended to 5,000 feet and began a systematic search pattern. The A-10's low speed allowed her to examine the terrain carefully, looking for any signs of wreckage, parachutes, or enemy activity. The morning sun created sharp shadows on the mountainsides, making it difficult to distinguish between natural rock formations and man-made objects. After 20 minutes of searching, Sarah spotted something unusual in a narrow valley about 12 miles from the F-35's last reported position. What looked like a series of rectangular objects had been arranged in a clearing, partially hidden under camouflage netting. The pattern was too regular to be natural, and the location was too remote for civilian activity. Overlord Control, Hog 47. I have possible enemy activity at Grid 79 Alpha. Multiple vehicles or equipment pieces under camouflage, approximately 2 miles west of the suspected crash site. Hog 47. Can you identify the equipment type? Sarah descended lower, circling the area while maintaining a safe distance. Through her binoculars, she could make out what appeared to be several truck-mounted systems and a command vehicle. Most concerning was what looked like a radar dish and several missile launchers pointed skyward. Overlord Control. This looks like a mobile surface-to-air missile site. I count at least 3 launcher vehicles and supporting equipment. This could be what happened to our F-35s. The response from ground control came after a pause that seemed to last forever. Hog 47. Maintain observation, but do not engage. We're coordinating additional assets for this situation. Additional assets meant that higher command was taking the situation seriously. Destroying a SAM site required careful planning and coordination, especially one positioned in terrain that made approach and escape routes extremely limited. The mountains created natural barriers that could funnel attacking aircraft into predictable flight paths, making them vulnerable to defensive fire. As Sarah continued her observation, she noticed increased activity around the missile site. Personnel were moving between the vehicles, and what appeared to be additional equipment was being uncovered. The enemy was clearly aware that their position might have been compromised and was preparing for possible action. Then, her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 11. Aircraft is severely damaged and attempting emergency landing. I have Viper 12 in sight. His aircraft appears to be down in the valley approximately 2 miles south of my position. Sarah immediately changed course toward the voice on the radio. One of the F-35 pilots was still alive and attempting to land his damaged aircraft somewhere in the mountainous terrain. But the transmission was weak and filled with static, making it difficult to determine the exact location. Viper 11, this is Hog 47. I'm in the area and searching for you. Can you provide your position? Hog 47, thank God. My navigation system is damaged and I'm not sure of my exact location. I'm in a narrow valley with steep walls, heading generally south. My engine is running rough, and I'm losing hydraulic pressure. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to triangulate the pilot's position based on his description and the strength of his radio signal. There were several valleys in the area that matched his description, and searching all of them would take time that the damaged F-35 might not have. Viper 11, can you see any distinctive terrain features? Rock formations, specific peak shapes, anything that might help me locate you? Negative, everything looks the same down here. Wait, I think I see smoke ahead. That might be Viper 12's aircraft. The situation was becoming increasingly complex. One F-35 was down, possibly with casualties, while another was flying on damaged systems and attempting an emergency landing. Meanwhile, an enemy SAM site was operating in the area, capable of engaging any rescue aircraft that might be sent in. Sarah made a decision that went against standard operating procedures, but aligned with her understanding of the situation's urgency. Instead of waiting for additional assets and coordination from higher command, she decided to begin the search and rescue operation immediately. Viper 11, I'm going to start searching the valleys south of the SAM site. When you see or hear an A-10, try to signal me with any emergency equipment you have. Roger, Hog-47. Be advised, I think the SAM site is tracking aircraft in this area. My threat warning system was going crazy before it failed. The warning confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The enemy missile site was actively searching for aircraft, and any rescue attempt would face significant risks. But leaving the downed pilots in enemy territory was not an option, regardless of the dangers involved. Sarah began a systematic search of the valleys, flying lower than prudent given the SAM threat, but knowing that altitude was necessary to spot the aircraft or pilots. The A-10's rugged construction and redundant systems gave her some confidence, but she knew that even the Warthog's legendary durability had limits. As she flew deeper into the mountainous terrain, Sarah reflected on the morning's earlier conversation with her fellow pilots. They had questioned the relevance of her aircraft in modern warfare, arguing that sophisticated threats required sophisticated responses. But now, in this remote and dangerous environment, the characteristics they had dismissed as obsolete were exactly what the mission required. The F-35s, with all their advanced technology, had been successfully engaged by enemy forces and were now depending on the very aircraft their pilots had mocked. The irony was not lost on Sarah, but she took no satisfaction in it. All that mattered now was finding the downed pilots and getting them home safely. The radio crackled again with Viper 11's voice, weaker now and filled with stress. Hog-47, I'm going to have to put it down. Engine is failing and I'm running out of options. I see a small clearing ahead, going to try for it. Viper 11, I'm still searching for you. After you land, stay with your aircraft if possible and keep trying to signal me. Sarah pushed her aircraft harder, descending into valleys that seemed barely wide enough for the A-10's wingspan. She was now flying in conditions that would have been challenging even during training. But the urgency of the situation overrode normal safety considerations. Then, in a valley that seemed identical to a dozen others she had searched, Sarah spotted a column of black smoke rising from a cluster of rocks near what appeared to be a small clearing. Her heart raced as she realized she might have found one of the missing F-35s. Sarah descended toward the smoke, her eyes scanning the rocky terrain below for any signs of the crashed F-35. As she got closer, she could make out the distinctive angular shape of the stealth fighter wedged between two large boulders. Parts of the aircraft were scattered across the small valley floor, and flames were still visible near what remained of the engine section. Overlord Control, Hog-47. I have located the crash site of what appears to be Viper 12. Aircraft is destroyed and burning. I don't see any signs of the pilot yet. As Sarah circled the crash site at low altitude, she spotted movement near a cluster of rocks about 200 meters from the wreckage. A figure in a flight suit was waving frantically, using what appeared to be a signal mirror to reflect sunlight toward her aircraft. Overlord Control, I have visual contact with the pilot of Viper 12. He appears to be mobile and signaling. I'm going to establish communication with him. Sarah switched to the emergency frequency and tried to contact the downed pilot directly. Viper 12, this is Hog-47 overhead. If you can hear me, continue signaling with your mirror. The reflection from below immediately began flashing in a pattern that Sarah recognized as Morse code for OK. The pilot was alive, conscious, and able to communicate. Viper 12, I need to find Viper 11's location. He reported attempting an emergency landing approximately 2 miles from your position. Do you have any information about his location? The mirror flashing stopped for a moment, then resumed with a different pattern. Sarah struggled to read the Morse code while maintaining her circling pattern in the confined valley. After several repetitions, she was able to make out the message. Northeast Valley saw smoke. Sarah acknowledged the message and climbed out of the valley to search for Viper 11. The terrain to the northeast was even more challenging, with narrow valleys separated by razor-sharp ridges. If the F-35 pilot had attempted an emergency landing in this area, his options would have been extremely limited. After 10 minutes of searching, Sarah spotted another column of smoke rising from a valley about 3 miles from the first crash site. As she approached, she could see the second F-35, its landing gear extended but one wing clearly damaged. The aircraft had apparently attempted a belly landing in a clearing barely long enough for the aircraft's wheelbase. Unlike the first crash site, this aircraft appeared to be relatively intact. Sarah could see the pilot climbing out of the cockpit and waving toward her aircraft. The emergency landing had been successful, but the F F-35 was clearly not going to fly again without major repairs. Overlord Control, Hog 47. I have located Viper 11. Pilot appears uninjured, and aircraft is intact, but not flyable. Both pilots are alive and appear to be in good condition. Roger, Hog 47. Excellent work. We're coordinating search and rescue assets, but it's going to take time to get helicopters into that terrain. Can you maintain overwatch until rescue assets arrive? Sarah checked her fuel gauges. She had enough fuel for approximately 2 more hours of flight time, which should be sufficient for rescue helicopters to reach the area. However, the presence of the SAM site complicated any rescue attempt significantly. Overlord Control, be advised that any rescue operation will need to address the SAM site I reported earlier. That system is still active and poses a threat to rescue aircraft. Understood, Hog 47. We're working on a plan to neutralize that threat. As Sarah continued to orbit over the crash sites, she monitored radio traffic between various command centers as they coordinated the rescue operation. What she heard was not encouraging. The rescue helicopters were still over an hour away from the area, and the mission to neutralize the SAM site was being delayed due to concerns about collateral damage and the need for additional intelligence. Meanwhile, both downed pilots were exposed in enemy territory with limited survival equipment. The longer they remained on the ground, the greater the chances that enemy forces would locate and capture them. Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission from Viper 12, now using his survival radio. Hog 47, I'm observing vehicle movement in the valley to my west. Looks like enemy forces searching for us. Sarah immediately changed course toward Viper 12's position and descended to investigate. Through her binoculars, she could see several pickup trucks moving along a mountain road, with armed personnel visible in the truck beds. The vehicles were moving systematically through the valleys, clearly conducting a search operation. Overlord Control, we have enemy ground forces actively searching for the downed pilots. This situation is becoming time-critical. Hog 47, maintain overwatch, but do not engage unless the pilots are in immediate danger. We're still working on the overall rescue plan. Sarah understood the reasoning behind the order, but she also understood that bureaucratic delays could result in the capture or death of the downed pilots. The enemy forces knew that American aircraft had been shot down in the area, and they would be highly motivated to capture the pilots for intelligence value and propaganda purposes. As she continued to monitor the situation, Sarah noticed that the enemy search pattern was becoming more systematic. The vehicles were working their way through the valleys in a grid pattern, and it was only a matter of time before they reached the crash sites. Then, her radio erupted with urgent transmissions from Viper 11. Hog 47, I have enemy personnel approaching my position on foot. They're about 500 meters away and closing fast. I'm going to have to move. Sarah looked down at the pilot's location and could see several figures moving carefully through the rocks toward the crashed F-35. The pilot was trapped in the small valley with limited escape routes and no cover beyond the scattered boulders. Viper 11, can you reach any defensible position? Cave, rock formation, anywhere you can take cover. Negative, the terrain is too open. If they get much closer, they're going to spot me for sure. Sarah made a decision that would define her career and possibly save 2 lives. Despite orders to maintain overwatch only, she armed her weapons systems and began a low approach toward the enemy personnel threatening Viper 11. Overlord Control, the situation on the ground has become critical. I'm going to provide close air support to protect the downed pilots. Hog 47, you are ordered to maintain current position and wait for authorization before engaging. But Sarah was already committed to her attack run. She could see the enemy personnel clearly now, armed with rifles, and moving in a tactical formation toward the downed pilot's hiding position. In a few more minutes, they would have direct visual contact with Viper 11. The A-10's cannon was designed for exactly this type of engagement. The massive Gu-8 Avenger could deliver devastating firepower with surgical precision, capable of engaging individual targets without causing excessive collateral damage. Sarah lined up her attack run, using the natural terrain to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The enemy personnel had no warning before the A-10 appeared over the ridge line, its cannon firing with the distinctive sound that had earned it the nickname, the Hand of God. The burst lasted only 2 seconds, but the 30mm depleted uranium round struck with devastating accuracy. The immediate threat to Viper 11 was eliminated. Overlord Control, immediate threat to Viper 11 has been neutralized. But We have bigger problems coming. Sarah climbed back to altitude and observed the wider tactical situation. Her attack on the ground personnel had alerted every enemy unit in the area. Vehicles were converging on both crash sites, and she could see personnel dismounting from trucks and moving on foot toward the downed pilots' positions. More concerning was activity at the SAM site. The radar systems were clearly active, and Sarah could see missile launchers being repositioned to cover different approach routes. Her attack had triggered a coordinated enemy response that was rapidly escalating beyond what a single A-10 could handle. Hog 47, Overlord Control. Be advised that enemy communications are spiking throughout the region. You've stirred up a hornet's nest down there. Roger, Overlord. But the pilots were about to be captured. I had no choice. Sarah's fuel situation was also becoming critical. The combat maneuvering and low-altitude flying had consumed fuel faster than normal, and she was approaching the point where she would need to return to base or risk running out of fuel over enemy territory. Overlord Control, I have approximately 40 minutes of fuel remaining. What's the status on rescue assets? Hog 47, rescue helicopters are still 30 minutes out, but they can't enter the area until the SAM threat is neutralized. The strike package to take out the missile site is still being organized. The mathematics of the situation were grim. Sarah would run out of fuel before rescue helicopters arrived, leaving the downed pilots unprotected against increasingly aggressive enemy forces. The strike package to eliminate the SAM site might take hours to organize and execute, by which time the pilots would certainly be captured or worse. As Sarah processed these realities, her radio crackled with another urgent transmission from Viper 1-2. Hog 47, I count at least 20 enemy personnel moving toward my position from multiple directions. They've got me surrounded, and I'm running out of places to hide. Sarah looked down at the second crash site and could see that the situation there had also deteriorated rapidly. Enemy forces were closing in from 3 different directions, and the pilot had very little cover in the rocky terrain around his downed aircraft. She faced a decision that would determine whether she went down in military history as a hero or as a pilot who disobeyed direct orders. The rules of engagement were clear, and she had already pushed beyond what was authorized. But 2 American pilots were about to be captured or killed, and she was the only asset in position to help them. Sarah checked her ammunition status and fuel gauges one more time, then keyed her radio. Overlord Control, I'm going to continue providing close air support for the downed pilots. Send whatever backup you can, but I'm not leaving them. Hog 47, you are ordered to return to base immediately. Do not engage further enemy forces. Sarah switched off her radio and turned toward the enemy forces threatening Viper 1-2. She had just committed herself to a course of action that would either save 2 lives or result in the loss of 3 aircraft and 3 pilots. But as she lined up for her next attack run, she knew there was no other choice she could live with. With her radio deliberately switched off, Sarah felt the weight of complete tactical independence for the first time in her military career. No voices from command centers hundreds of miles away, no conflicting orders from officers who couldn't see the battlefield, no bureaucratic delays while American pilots faced capture or death. Just her aircraft, and the immediate reality of what needed to be done. She rolled into a steep dive toward the enemy forces surrounding Viper 1-2's position. Through her targeting system, she could see approximately 15 personnel moving through the rocks in a coordinated search pattern. They had positioned themselves to block all possible escape routes from the crash site, demonstrating tactical competence that made them a serious threat. The A-10's attack angle put the morning sun directly behind her aircraft, making it difficult for ground forces to spot her approach until she was already in her firing run. Sarah selected her cannon and lined up on the largest concentration of enemy personnel. The GAU-8 Avenger had been designed to destroy tanks, which meant that personnel in the open had virtually no chance of survival against its 30mm rounds. The cannon fired for 3 seconds, sending over 150 rounds downrange with devastating accuracy. The high-explosive incendiary rounds detonated among the rocks where enemy personnel had taken cover, creating a storm of shrapnel and concussion that eliminated the immediate threat to the downed pilot. Sarah pulled out of her dive and climbed back to altitude, already planning her next attack. The enemy response was immediate and intense. Small arms fire erupted from multiple positions as surviving personnel tried to engage her aircraft. She could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing near her cockpit and felt several impacts against the A-10's armored hull. The Warthog shrugged off the ground fire without any apparent damage. The aircraft's titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit and its redundant flight control systems had been specifically designed to survive this type of engagement. Where other aircraft would have been crippled by the concentrated small arms fire, the A-10 continued flying normally. Viper 1-2, this is Hog 47. I've cleared the immediate area around your position, but you need to be ready to move when rescue assets arrive. Find the best defensive position you can and stay low. Hog 47, thank you. That was getting very close. I can see enemy vehicles still approaching from the east, but the immediate threat is gone. Sarah turned her attention back to Viper 1-1's position and was alarmed by what she observed. Enemy forces had regrouped after her initial attack and were now approaching the crash site with vehicles. She could count at least 4 pickup trucks with mounted weapons, plus additional personnel on foot. The concentration of enemy forces was much larger than she had initially estimated. More concerning was the organized nature of their response. These were not random insurgents stumbling across crash sites. The speed and coordination of their reactions suggested advanced planning and possibly real-time intelligence about the downed aircraft. Someone was directing this operation from a higher level. As Sarah maneuvered for another attack run, her threat warning system suddenly came alive with audio and visual alerts. A surface-to-air missile had been launched from the SAM site she had identified earlier. The missile was tracking toward her aircraft, and she had only seconds to react. Sarah immediately began evasive maneuvers, deploying chaff and flares while diving toward the mountainous terrain. The missile followed her initial turn but lost lock as she disappeared into a narrow valley, using the surrounding peaks to break the radar guidance signal. The missile detonated harmlessly against a mountain slope several thousand feet from her aircraft. The SAM launch confirmed that enemy forces were coordinating their response to her attacks. The missile site was providing air defense coverage for the ground forces, making her mission exponentially more dangerous. Every time she descended to attack ground targets, she would be vulnerable to missile engagement from the SAM site. But abandoning the downed pilots was not an option. Sarah climbed back to altitude and assessed the tactical situation. The enemy had revealed their missile capability, which meant she now knew the location and approximate range of the threat. More importantly, the SAM site had fired one of their missiles, reducing their available inventory. Sarah's military training had emphasized the importance of turning enemy strengths into vulnerabilities. The SAM site's radar system worked both ways. While it could detect and engage her aircraft, it also revealed its own position every time it transmitted. If she could find a way to approach the site from an unexpected direction, she might be able to eliminate the threat entirely. The mountainous terrain offered possibilities that would not have existed in flatter country. The radar beams could not penetrate solid rock, which meant that valleys and ridges created radar shadows where aircraft could approach undetected. The challenge was finding an approach route that would allow her to get close enough to the SAM site to attack it effectively. Sarah studied the topographical features around the missile site and identified a possible approach route. A winding valley extended from the south toward the SAM position, with high ridges on both sides that should mask her aircraft from radar detection. If she could fly low enough through the valley, she might be able to surprise the missile site before they could react. The attack would require her to fly at extremely low altitude through terrain that left no margin for error. The valley was narrow, with rocky walls rising steeply on both sides. There would be no room for evasive maneuvers if she encountered unexpected threats, and no possibility of escape if her aircraft suffered damage that affected its flying capabilities. But eliminating the SAM site would allow rescue helicopters to safely enter the area and extract the downed pilots. It would also remove the greatest threat to her own survival, allowing her to continue providing air support until rescue assets arrived. Sarah turned toward the southern approach to the valley and descended to an altitude that was barely above the valley floor. The rocky walls seemed to close in around her aircraft as she flew deeper into the canyon. Her altimeter showed her flying at heights that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances, but the mission requirements left her no choice. Flying at such low altitude in mountainous terrain required total concentration. Sarah had to constantly adjust her flight path to follow the valley's winding course while maintaining enough airspeed to keep the heavily loaded A-10 flying safely. The margin between controlled flight and disaster was measured in feet rather than hundreds of feet. As she approached the location of the SAM site, Sarah could see the missile launchers and support vehicles positioned in a clearing between two ridges. The enemy had chosen their location well, with natural barriers providing protection from most approach directions. Only the southern valley offered a concealed approach route, and they probably considered it too dangerous for conventional aircraft to attempt. They had not counted on an A-10 pilot desperate enough to try it. Sarah armed her Maverick missiles and selected the SAM site's radar vehicle as her primary target. Destroying the radar would blind the entire missile system, making it impossible for them to engage aircraft even if the launchers themselves remained functional. She would have one chance to make the attack before enemy forces realized what was happening. The approach required precise timing. Sarah needed to remain below the radar horizon until the last possible moment, then climb just enough to lock onto her target and fire her missiles before descending back into the protective valley. She would be exposed for only a few seconds, but those seconds would determine whether she eliminated the threat or flew into a wall of defensive fire. At precisely the moment she calculated would give her the best attack geometry, Sarah pulled the A-10 into a climbing turn that brought her above the ridge line with the SAM site directly ahead. Her targeting system immediately locked onto the radar vehicle, and she fired 2 Maverick missiles in rapid succession. The missiles streaked toward their target as Sarah dove back toward the valley floor. She heard explosions behind her as the Mavericks found their mark, followed by secondary explosions that suggested she had hit something containing ammunition or fuel. The distinctive radar signature that had been tracking aircraft in the area disappeared from her threat warning system. Overlord Control, HOG 47. The SAM site has been neutralized. I repeat, the surface-to-air missile threat has been eliminated. Sarah had switched her radio back on after completing the attack on the missile site. The response from ground control came immediately. HOG 47, Overlord Control. Confirms SAM site destruction. Rescue assets are inbound to your location. Confirmed, Overlord. The missile site is destroyed. But I have heavy enemy ground forces still threatening both down pilots. Rescue aircraft will need immediate escort when they arrive. As Sarah climbed back to altitude to assess the overall situation, she was shocked by what she observed. The destruction of the SAM site had triggered a massive enemy response. Vehicles were streaming into the area from multiple directions, and she could count over 50 enemy personnel converging on the crash sites. The enemy clearly understood that the elimination of their air defense had made the area vulnerable to rescue operations. They were rushing to capture or kill the downed pilots before American forces could extract them. What had started as a search and recovery operation was rapidly escalating into a major firefight. Sarah checked her fuel gauges and weapons inventory. She had approximately 20 minutes of fuel remaining and had expended most of her missiles destroying the SAM site. Her cannon still had sufficient ammunition, but engaging the number of enemy forces now in the area would require more resources than a single A-10 could provide. Overlord Control, I need backup immediately. Enemy forces are massing for a final assault on both pilot locations. I can hold them off for a few more minutes, but I'm running low on fuel and ammunition. HOG 47, rescue helicopters are 15 minutes out. Can you maintain overwatch until they arrive? Sarah looked at her fuel gauges again and made the calculation that every pilot dreaded. She had enough fuel to return to base safely, but not enough to continue the mission and still make it home. Staying to protect the downed pilots would mean risking her own aircraft and possibly her life if she ran out of fuel over enemy territory. But as she looked down at the 2 crash sites where American pilots were fighting for their survival, Sarah knew that leaving was not an option. She had brought them this far, and she would see the mission through to completion regardless of the personal cost. She keyed her radio for what might be her final transmission of the mission. Overlord Control, HOG 47 will remain on station until rescue is complete. Send everything you've got. Sarah's fuel gauges now showed levels that would normally trigger an immediate return to base. Every minute she remained over the target area reduced her chances of making it home safely. But below her, 2 American pilots were completely dependent on her protection against overwhelming enemy forces. The tactical situation had deteriorated rapidly since the destruction of the SAM site. Enemy vehicles were approaching both crash sites simultaneously, and Sarah could see coordinated movement that suggested professional military training rather than irregular insurgent forces. Whoever was directing this operation had significant resources and was committed to capturing the downed pilots. Viper 1-1, what's your status? Sarah called over the emergency frequency. HOG 47, I can see at least 3 vehicles approaching from the north. I'm in a defensive position among some rocks, but if they get much closer, I'm going to have to surrender or fight with just my sidearm. Sarah turned toward Viper 1-1's position and could see the approaching vehicles clearly. Two pickup trucks with mounted machine guns were moving along a mountain road, while a third vehicle was attempting to position itself to block any escape routes. The pilots would be completely surrounded within minutes. She armed her cannon and began her attack run, knowing that this engagement would consume most of her remaining ammunition. The GAU-8 Avenger had enough rounds for approximately 10 seconds of firing time, and she needed to make every burst count. Sarah's first target was the vehicle attempting to block the escape route. Her cannon fire struck the pickup truck dead center, the 30mm rounds tearing through the vehicle's engine block and fuel tank. The truck exploded in a ball of orange flame, eliminating that threat permanently. The other two vehicles immediately began evasive maneuvers, their drivers clearly understanding that they were under attack from aircraft. But the mountain road offered limited options for escape, and Sarah was able to engage the second vehicle as it attempted to reverse direction. Another burst from the cannon sent it tumbling down a steep embankment. The third vehicle had reached a position where trees and rocks provided some concealment from air attack. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as personnel in the truck bed fired at her aircraft, but the range was too great for small arms to be effective against the A-10's armor. Viper 1-1, immediate threat has been reduced, but stay in cover. I can see more vehicles approaching from the east. Sarah's threat warning system was clear of missile threats, confirming that the SAM site had been completely eliminated. But her fuel situation was now critical. She had perhaps 10 minutes of flying time remaining, and the rescue helicopters were still several minutes away. She turned toward Viper 1-2's location and was dismayed to see that the situation there was even worse. A convoy of vehicles had surrounded the crash site, and enemy personnel were moving on foot through the rocks toward the downed pilot's position. The concentration of forces was too large for her remaining ammunition to handle effectively. Viper 1-2, you have heavy enemy forces closing on your position. I'm going to try to disperse them, but you need to be ready to move when rescue arrives. Sarah began what would likely be her final attack run of the mission. She selected the largest concentration of enemy personnel and opened fire with her cannon, walking the rounds through their positions with devastating effect. The high-explosive incendiary rounds detonated among the rocks, creating chaos and forcing the survivors to seek deeper cover. But even as she eliminated one group of threats, Sarah could see that more enemy forces were arriving. The area was becoming a major battlefield, with resources being committed by both sides that far exceeded the original scope of the rescue mission. Her radio crackled with a transmission that brought the first good news she had heard all day. Hog 47, this is Rescue 1-1. We have visual on your location and are beginning our approach. Can you provide cover for our landing? Sarah looked toward the northern horizon and could see two UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters approaching at low altitude. The rescue aircraft were flying fast and staying low to minimize their exposure to ground fire, but they would be extremely vulnerable during the landing and pickup phases. Rescue 1-1, be advised that you have active enemy forces at both landing sites. I've suppressed most of the immediate threats, but you're going to face ground fire during the extraction. Roger, Hog 47. We're coming in fast and hard. Keep their heads down for us. Sarah realized that her final contribution to the mission would be to provide cover for the rescue helicopters during their most vulnerable phase. She still had enough cannon ammunition for one or two more engagements, and she could use her aircraft's presence as a psychological weapon even after her ammunition was exhausted. The first helicopter descended toward Viper 1-1's location while Sarah orbited overhead, watching for any signs of enemy reaction. She could see the downed F-35 pilot running toward the landing zone as the Black Hawk touched down. Door gunners on the helicopter immediately began engaging enemy positions that Sarah had not been able to eliminate. The pickup was completed in less than 30 seconds, with the helicopter lifting off and climbing away from the mountainous terrain as quickly as possible. One pilot was safe. The second helicopter approached Viper 1-2's location, but this extraction would be much more challenging. Enemy forces had concentrated around this crash site, and Sarah could see multiple groups of personnel positioned to fire on the rescue aircraft. She made one final attack run with her remaining cannon ammunition, targeting the largest concentration of enemy forces. The GAU-8 fired its last burst of rounds, creating enough disruption to allow the rescue helicopter to complete its approach. As the second Black Hawk touched down near Viper 1-2's position, Sarah's fuel gauges showed levels that made immediate departure mandatory. She had pushed her aircraft to its absolute limits, and staying any longer would guarantee that she would run out of fuel before reaching friendly territory. But she could not resist making one final pass over the rescue site, using her aircraft's intimidating presence to discourage enemy forces from firing on the vulnerable helicopter. The A-10's distinctive twin-engine configuration and battle-scarred appearance had earned it a fearsome reputation among enemy forces, who knew that engaging the aircraft meant facing its devastating cannon. The psychological effect worked. Enemy personnel remained in cover as the rescue helicopter completed the second pickup and climbed away from the valley. Both F-35 pilots were safe. Rescue 1-1. Both pilots are secure. Excellent work, everyone. Hog 47. This is Rescue 1-1. We couldn't have done this without you. Outstanding job. Sarah turned toward home with her fuel gauges showing levels that she had never seen before in combat. The return flight to Bagram would require every drop of fuel remaining in her tanks, with no margin for error or unexpected delays. As she climbed toward cruising altitude, Sarah reflected on the mission that had just concluded. When the day began, she had been flying a routine patrol in an aircraft that her fellow pilots considered obsolete. She had faced mockery and condescension from pilots who flew newer, more sophisticated fighters. But when those same sophisticated fighters had been shot down by enemy forces, it was the supposedly obsolete A-10 that had saved the day. The aircraft's unique combination of firepower, durability, and persistence had proven irreplaceable in a situation where high technology had failed. Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission from air traffic control at Bagram. Hog 47, Bagram Control. We have you on approach. Be advised that there are several people here who want to speak with you when you land. Sarah smiled for the first time all day. She suspected that some of those conversations would be challenging, given her decision to disobey direct orders during the rescue operation. But she was confident that saving 2 American pilots would outweigh any concerns about protocol violations. More importantly, she knew that the mission would be studied and analyzed for years to come. The tactical lessons learned would influence training and doctrine development throughout the Air Force. The debate about the relevance of close air support aircraft in modern warfare would be viewed through the lens of what had happened in the mountains of Afghanistan. As Bagram Airfield came into view ahead of her aircraft, Sarah began her approach with fuel gauges showing levels that would have been impossible to achieve without the A-10's exceptional efficiency. She had pushed both herself and her aircraft beyond normal operational limits and had brought everyone home safely. The landing was smooth, despite her exhaustion and the stress of the extended mission. As Sarah taxied toward the flight line, she could see crowds of personnel waiting near her parking spot. Word of the rescue mission had apparently spread throughout the base. After shutting down her engines, Sarah sat in her cockpit for a moment, processing the events of the day. She thought about the conversation that morning with Lieutenant Colonel Webb and Captain Morrison, who had questioned her choice to continue flying the A-10. She wondered what they would say now, knowing that their advanced F-35s had been shot down while her obsolete aircraft had completed one of the most successful rescue missions in recent memory. As she climbed down from her aircraft, Sarah was approached by her squadron commander and several other senior officers. Their expressions were serious, but she could detect something else: respect, perhaps, or maybe just amazement that she had pulled off such an improbable mission. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting near the aircraft with his maintenance crew, already beginning their post-flight inspection. He grinned as Sarah approached. "Captain, I don't know what you did out there, but this old bird looks like she's been through a war. And I'm guessing she performed exactly the way she was supposed to." Sarah looked back at her aircraft, taking in the bullet holes, scorch marks, and other evidence of the day's combat. The A-10 looked exactly like what it was, a combat veteran that had been pushed to its limits, but had delivered when it mattered most. "Sergeant Rodriguez, she performed better than I could have hoped. This aircraft just saved 2 lives and proved that sometimes the old ways are still the best ways." As Sarah walked toward the debriefing that would undoubtedly last for hours, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that she had been right to believe in her aircraft and her mission. The A-10 Thunderbolt II might be scheduled for retirement, but its legacy was secure. On this day, in the mountains of Afghanistan, the Warthog had reminded everyone why it had earned its fearsome reputation. The debate about the future of close air support would continue in conference rooms and planning offices around the world. But Sarah knew that no amount of theoretical analysis could replace the reality of what she had experienced. When American pilots needed rescue from hostile territory, when enemy forces threatened to overrun defensive positions, when the mission required an aircraft that could absorb punishment and keep fighting, there was still nothing in the world that could match the capabilities of the A-10 Warthog. As she disappeared into the operations building for her debriefing, Sarah left behind an aircraft that bore the scars of one of the most challenging missions in modern military history. The bullet holes and blast marks would be repaired, the systems would be tested and restored, and the A-10 would be ready to fly again within days. Because that's what Warthogs do. They take the punishment, complete the mission, and come back ready to do it all again.